Change begins from within. As easy as it is to look outside of ourselves and want the world to change, the truth is, it never will if we remain the same. This podcast was created for changemakers like you who want more love and connection in your community. Today, you are going to hear stories that will inspire you and also challenge you to be the change. We are going to go deep, my friend. So take a deep breath and settle in. My name is Emilia Tamburini. Welcome to the Circle of Change. Welcome to our second episode of the winter season. I'm grateful for your presence here in this conversation. I think it is a dialogue for our time and one that will touch a lot of hearts at this time of year when many people struggle with mental health. Today, we are joined by three former police officers who talk to us about trauma in first responder organizations and how each of them, in their own way, are transforming the systems from the inside out with mindfulness and meditation practices. This conversation is powerful and eye-opening. If you don't have experience with first responder organizations, you are going to learn a lot, just like I did. The police, the ambulance, the paramedics, these are vital services in our community, and there's been a lot of attention paid to them over the past number of years since the murder of George Floyd. The issues of systemic racism and police reform continue to be relevant discussions today. So this conversation is timely. It's also timely because we're in the dark season, and many people at this time of year struggle with mental health. And first responders are often involved in showing up for people when they are at their darkest moments. We as changemakers are also in this period of considering what is needed to truly transform our systems and organizations to make them more sustainable, life-giving, places where people can thrive while being of service. There are so many nuggets in this conversation for that opportunity that is before us. The officers that we are joined by today are Renae Stevenson, Les Sylven, and Jill Parker. I've included their biographies in the show notes and won't read them here as they each share with us their path to policing and what they are up to now in our conversation. I have deep respect for these people. They are true change makers, making waves of change from the ground up in institutions that traditionally have been and still are resistant to the courageous work they are proposing. And they keep going. We get into that conversation as well. What is it that keeps them going? So if you are struggling, sometimes wondering why you keep trying to help people see the light or change systems that feel unchangeable, then this conversation may give you some hope to let you know that you're not alone in that struggle and a reminder of what it is to focus on to keep moving forward. I will come back at the end to pull out a few more nuggets. Welcome to this inspiring circle, changemaker. Renae, Jill, and Les, welcome to the Circle of Change.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. I do want to start, first of all, just by thanking each and every one of you for your service. You know, it's not everybody that wakes up and wants to serve the public in the way that you have as police officers, and I appreciate you.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's an honor. I'm sure everyone would agree to be able to line up your things that you feel you can help the world with the place that the world needs you. So it feels like an honor to be able to even have done the job. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a privilege.
I love that. I know I'm going to be a learner in a beginner's mind today because although I do work in restorative justice, I'm not connected at all with the lives of first responders. And I know today is going to be heart and mind opening for me. And I think for the listener as well, that's sitting with us here in this circle. I'm also looking forward to it because I think this conversation is timely and potentially missing in the discourse that's happening right now around police reform. So I'm glad you're here to add your stories and your experiences to that conversation. So I'm going to start by settling us in, and I think all three of you will appreciate this given the work that you're up to now. So I'll take a moment to do that, and then I'm going to read a poem, and then we'll jump into that first question. So I encourage you, or I invite you to close your eyes if that feels good for you, and for our listener as well, if you're in a safe space to do that. Feel the ground underneath you. If you're standing, just really feel your feet solidly on the ground. If you're sitting, feel that support underneath you, knowing that you are supported here in this conversation and always. And I invite you to take a deep breath in through your nose, expanding your belly. And big exhale out, just letting anything go that doesn't need to be here in this moment. And take a few more breaths on your own, really presencing yourself here, this beautiful place of the present moment. And open yourself up to what it is that you came here to receive today in this conversation. Our poem today is by Kay Roberts. To those who keep us safe. We tend to take for granted those things in life that we rely upon, but don't often see. We don't see through the same eyes of those who serve or dedicate their lives to keeping us safe. We don't know the same fears or pains, the dangers they face or the crosses they bear. We live our lives in a detached awareness, a vague oblivion, knowing they are there, somewhere, doing something. To those who serve, I honor you and thank you. Forgive my ignorance to those challenges you face, to the dangers that I could not endure. Thank you for the sacrifices you and your family have made so that I might have the time and freedom with my own. Know that the blood you have shed, the long goodbyes, and the unseen tears are not forgotten nor diminished as we honor your dedication to keeping us safe. So welcome back into this space, this circle. I love starting our circles with the question, who are you? And of course, people know you through your bios up until this moment. And of course, you're so much more than that. So the question I'll put into the circle is, who are you? And whoever wants to go first, feel free to pick up the talking piece. If you did bring a talking piece as well, feel free to introduce it during this round.
So my talking piece, this is my family. So in kind of describing who I am, I'm Jill. I'm a mom, a partner, a daughter, sister. I'm many things. I'm a retired first responder. So I was a police officer in Abbotsford for 19 years. I retired in 2016, and now I work as a counselor. So I'm a registered clinical counselor and a registered social worker. That's a little bit about what I do. I enjoy ocean swimming, running, yoga, mindfulness. So crafts, reading, knitting, just like a whole bunch of different things. So I just really enjoy. And when I think about my talking piece, I think about how throughout my life, my family has grounded me, that have kind of kept me focused and kept me on the path. So when I think about what I'm most grateful for, I think about my family. So yeah, I feel very blessed. That's a bit about who Jill is.
My name is Les, and I am a work in progress. I am very lucky to be zooming in here on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich First Nations. I'm kind of right near Pecoles, or what is called Mount Doug, so kind of near the Yuvik area. And I feel very lucky and blessed to be here on those territories. I say I'm a work in progress because I'm still trying to figure out what to do when I grow up. I sort of started a career in policing back in about 1988. Started with the RCMP, ended up getting transferred out here. My big northern posting was Squamish, so that's as north and as cold as I got. and worked in Vancouver, but fell in love with the island, Vancouver Island. So tried to get over here with the RCMP, didn't work out. So I left and joined the Victoria Police Department, and that was in '96. And I was there for about 16 years, had a chance to do everything I wanted to do twice. Had a great career with them, and then finished off the last 8 years in a smaller department called Central Saanich, where I was there up until 2020 when I retired from there. About 7 or 8 years ago, I wandered up to UVic here, and they have a program in the Faculty of Education called Leadership Studies. So I had someone who liked my research question around meditation and police leadership. So I started the PhD program there about 7 years ago, and I'm trying to finish that now. So I'm writing that, exploring how the practice of meditation and mindfulness might influence the practice of leadership. So that's kind of the surface part. I have a wonderful, lovely family who supports me in my ongoing journey to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And like I say, just delighted to be here.
I'm delighted you guys are here too. I'm Renae. My talking stick, it's a stool. This was my grandmother's that was passed down to my dad's and then passed down to me. So I just love that it's a family heirloom and it's a solid foundation and it's a circle. It reminds me of a button, which is what my dad calls me. I'm a mom. I have 2 grown sons, 1 ginger 4-legged son, 3 international students who call me their Canadian mom. I am probably a wanderer, not a wanderer. I'm a wanderer. I am the most curious person. I'm that annoying, how come, why? I want to tinker, get under the hood, see how it works. Still, half century into this life, I am still studying, still curious. I am privileged to live on the traditional unceded territories of the Cowichan people, which is just stunning, also known as Mill Bay. And that's pretty cool for me. I have pretty mixed heritage, but that includes Cree and Métis. It's just super cool that I get to live in these lands and sort of embark on this healing sunset career. I'm also a retired police officer, and I'm a certified mindfulness teacher. Hopefully, one day I'm going to be a psychedelics therapist as well, which is my latest curiosity that I am undertaking to learn about. So that's me in a nutshell.
Oh, thank you all. The thread I picked up on in that was family and how important that is as supports in whatever way that family looks and is defined for you. Thank you for letting us know a little bit more about you. And I'd love to continue down that path because certainly I have a curiosity about what it is that drew you into being a police officer. What was that journey for you? And was there a motivation that got you into that line of work?
Full confession, I grew up, and this will date me, I grew up watching John and Poncho on Chips, Beretta, SWAT, Emergency, Starsky and Hutch, of course. And my grandma had their car. So she did, even the same color with the white stripe, which we did try and slide across the hood. She wasn't very happy about that. So, I was in love with policing, or at least what I saw on TV. And I was also really privileged to grow up with a very loving family and a dad he was just always serving, picking up people stranded on the highway, towing their car back, fixing it. So service was just something that I was kind of marinated in from a young age. And I also loved Star Wars. So I wanted to be a Jedi, but really you couldn't go anywhere to actually be a Jedi. So policing was just so interesting because it had so many careers within the career, but ultimately you were serving people and you were basically walking with people often during the most difficult times in their life, which is a privilege, as Jill alluded to, right? And so that's really sort of what drew me into policing. 25 years ago, I was one that was hugging people, which wasn't really popular at the time, to be the compassionate police officer. But that's what was drawn to me. Pop culture and sort of family history of just being able to serve.
I grew up in Calgary, like I may have mentioned there. And the story I tell myself, because I realize these are all stories we tell ourselves, but there was a period of time where the police came to my house quite a bit when I was growing up to deal with some mental health issues. I was probably between 10 and 14. And some of them would show up and make it worse. And some of them would show up and make it better. And I thought to myself, I think at that young age, that planted the seed. Wouldn't it be neat to be someone who could come into situations like that and make things better, knowing that some make it worse? So that was kind of early on in my life, a foundational thing. And it kind of is a thread that shows up a few times. I ended up going to University of Calgary, and after failing business school, I ended up finishing with a psychology degree. But I worked in the remand center as a correctional officer while I was going to school. And I found that I was quite comfortable working with people in the justice system. And I think I could always see my brother in one of these people, or I had the experience of that. And throughout my career, knew that, had that background where everybody has, we're all connected to somebody who could be in this position that, as a police officer, you're with, either as a victim or as an offender. So that was really, I think, what got me into wanting to see if I could help in that way. And then what kept me going was, it's a really wide variety of opportunities in a job, like for a profession. And, like we were kind of hinting at earlier on, if it lines up with who you are as a person and your values and that desire to want to serve the community, and you have that ability to, again, back to that idea of maybe make things better than worse, it just, the opportunities to you can have 30, 40 different careers in your time. So that kind of is what kept me going.
So kind of similarly to Renae, when I was younger, I loved like the police officer shows. One of my favorite was Cagney and Lacey. So I kind of identified as like, I wanted to be a detective and I wanted to be a mom as well. So that kind of, I thought that feels like a good fit for me. I graduated about 91. So in kind of that era, I grew up in Whitehorse, Yukon, so up north. So it's kind of a small community. And then when I looked around at options, I'm like, for myself, and maybe even some gender stuff, I'm like, do I want to be a secretary, a teacher, a nurse, or a police officer? Like, that was kind of my realm of a few things that were out there. And I'm like, yeah, I could imagine getting out there, responding to like people's emergencies, kind of helping people out. So that was always kind of appealing to me, to like be the first responder to someone's got a crisis, and you get to like drive there, you help them sort it out and figure it out, and be one of the people that help to make it better. So it ended up that my eyes weren't good enough at that time to get into policing. So instead, I never wanted to go to university, but I went to university because I thought, I guess I can't get in, so I'll pursue psychology and social work. So I got a Bachelor of Psychology and Sociology, and then I got my social work degree. So I thought, I'll be a social worker. And I thought, you know what? They have this laser eye surgery thing. Maybe I'll be a police officer. So I got laser eye surgery, and then I pursued policing. And the cool thing was, I'm glad that I had that education under my belt, because it made all the difference. So coming from the framework, particularly, like wondering why people do the things that they do. And then the social work framework was really helpful too, because it looks at systemic stuff and marginalization. So when I came from Victoria and then I moved to Abbotsford, a little bit of a different kind of community compared to Victoria, and having all these like social work ideas, it really worked well with how I policed. And when I think about like trauma-informed policing and kind of maybe getting a bigger picture of things. So you were saying stuff about restorative justice. Like, I just love that idea. I love like seeing humans and figuring out what is it. I like Gabor Mate stuff too. Like, what's happened to these two people that kind of brings them to the attention of police. So that was kind of my curiosity. So kind of coming from that helped me to enjoy the privilege of being a police officer and really lean into that type of policing. And then even kind of creating a few programs and stuff that involved community working to kind of help marginalized people and kind of connect police to helpers in the community. So that was super enriching. So yeah, so that's where I found myself. And then partway through, I did my master's of education at UVic in counseling psychology. And I found like that was extra helpful too. It's like lots of trauma informed kind of how do we help people and kind of having that knowledge. And then alongside my policing career, I worked in the hospital in Abbotsford in Surrey, like casually on my days off or as a acute mental health clinician. So I just found that it all made sense. When I had that knowledge behind me, I'm like, this all makes sense. Like, not that I have all the answers, but like, hey, I'm curious. Okay, I see how maybe this person landed in this spot. What can I do with the knowledge that I have to help support that person and maybe taking in the bigger picture and having just a compassion. And that was resilient for me, that I enjoyed it. And it was a privilege to kind of serve and to hold space for people and care about people in their hardest moment. And also believing in the resiliency that when you see people and the choices that they made and you're like, and think that they're doing the best they can with what they've got and thinking if that is their best, what was the hand that they dealt? And kind of maybe even having some appreciation for how they managed it or some curiosity around that. So helping people walk through hard times. Because when the police are called, it's usually a crisis. So it's an honor to kind of walk alongside people. So that I super enjoyed it. And now in my private practice in counseling, I see a lot of first responders, or I also see lots of victims of crime too. So kind of a mix. I enjoy it a lot.
Thank you all for sharing those stories. I learned a lot in that. First of all, I just love the pop culture inspiration. That's so great. So great. Wow. Just your love of humanity is what I heard in each of you, and finding ways to make things better for people who are in not so great circumstances in their lives, and being able to show up in that place through whatever motivation that drew you into that place, which is a little bit different for each of you. So I so appreciate that. And Jill, certainly I have a master's in epidemiology and studied social determinants of health quite a bit. So very much appreciate that lens of like, what are the other factors that led people to this space? And certainly that is a huge focus of restorative justice. So beautiful. So Jill, you really brought us into the mental health space. So that's where I'd love to continue this dialogue, because I know you're all immersed in supporting people's mental health through slightly different channels as well, in your own special way. So mental health, what is it about that you think is important? In other words, why are you choosing that as something to focus on? And how is it that you're supporting first responders or other population groups that you're working with around mental health in the work that you're doing today?
So my study up at UVic that sort of that I hinted at there before has to do with what they call commissioned officers in the RCMPs who agreed to participate in the study. So everyone, inspector up to commissioner, so about 600 or so, when they're kind of managers, more formal leadership roles. So on my journey of policing, I ended up taking on a couple formal roles, inspector, deputy chief, and then when I retired as the chief. Although what got me out of bed every day was the welfare of the people that I was responsible for, the police officers, I did notice that there was a lot of suck it up at that senior level, and the support at that sort of rank it's changed a lot, but there needed some work needed to be done there, is what I thought to myself. So, and initially I wasn't necessarily focusing on mental wellness or well-being. I was more focused on, why do some senior police leaders, why are they such jerks? Like how are they so, like they need some help. They need to be more human. They need to, they're not all of them, but doing what they think they need to do to project an image of a senior police leader, for example, And so going back a little bit here, just after being a recruit, I ended up wandering into a meditation studio, a transcendental meditation studio, and this was 30 some odd years ago. So that has been part of my life, a practice, a meditation practice throughout my career. And I felt like time and time and time again, I was very lucky to have that. The mental training, not just the physical training, but which led me to wanting to explore other police leaders who have long-term meditation practices to see how they look at things, or is it just me anyway? Am I just like this, and it doesn't matter if I just played hockey or if I just, but I want to talk about decision making. I want to talk about, how do you get to that point where you bring the best out of people, these kind of things. They kept wanting to talk. My research participants keep wanting to talk about trauma. So I talk about, some leadership theory stuff around leader-member exchange or empowering. We'll talk a bit about that, but then we'll talk about trauma. So it really led me to understand that it appears to me the foundation of police leadership is understanding. And again, I think I heard Renae say this, not being trauma informed, but trauma competent. I wanted to necessarily get in there and help people with their mental well-being, but it's just so prevalent in every discussion. And again, so these leaders are talking about, the people that they're responsible for going through these horrific situations, and how can they be there, and how can they induce mindfulness in the people that they're responsible for. As kind of one of the early findings of my study, or of this research.
Mine's a little different. Les came to mindfulness early, and that was like protective, obviously, for him throughout his career, and probably so essential in his leadership. I came to it kind of kicking and screaming. So my journey sort of into my advocacy in mental health and mental wellness for first responders came from my own journey with PTSD. Probably not unlike most police officers, a string of sort of operational stress injuries early in my career. The culture at that time was not sort of, you just suck it up, right? You just put it in the basket and put it on the shelf, but the basket's only so big, right? And eventually it gets full and it breaks the shelf and everything falls and all over the floor. So for me, I probably had PTSD long before I was actually diagnosed with it, but the wheels fell off my bus, just a series of events. And one of them was basically listening to a toddler watch his mother executed. And I had a toddler at the same time. And like I said, and not knowing that the wheels were off my bus, I was so dysregulated. I was so hypervigilant, working way too much, because that's kind of what the culture feeds us to do as well. And I had a full-on tantrum in my vehicle. Some little old lady obviously wasn't driving fast enough for my dysregulated, hypervigilant self, like literally swearing and cursing, freaking out. I wasn't in a rush to go anywhere. And when the dust settled, my toddler's bawling his eyes out in the back seat and wants to know why I'm so upset and what the bad person did. And his whole mission was to comfort me. And I'm like, wow, I am, for lack of a better term, pretty effed up. And so basically, part of that collision of events was a severe car accident with a spinal injury, a pretty horrific file that I worked, really bad workaholic tendencies, and my body crapped out. And then I was privileged to meet my physical rehab doctor, my physiatrist, who introduced me to meditation and mindfulness. Like I said, not openly. I was very, very, very resistant. Les likes to say that he's a work in progress, and I like to say that I'm a recovering asshole. And I'm in recovery still. Basically nothing else was working. And so I thought I would try this. And you got to remember, this is like more than a decade ago, and it wasn't trendy. There weren't apps. LeBron James wasn't taking timeouts to do this. And certainly it wasn't something in my culture that would, like police culture, that I would accept that. So I was a closet meditator for many years. And then, as Jill knows, two of our friends, police colleagues, committed suicide a month apart. And that was it for me. I had to do something. I went back to school, and that's where I researched mindfulness. And I found the only institution in the world that was researching it with first responders, which was Pacific University, and a fellow by the name of Rich Gerling with Mindful Badge. And that's what I sunk my teeth into, was that research, how to bring mindfulness to first responders. I tried to do that many years ago, wasn't super receptive at my police department, which ironically was around the same time Les wasn't super successful, even as a chief at his police department. Anyhow, so went on, and that's where I went on to sort of take my teacher designation in it. And I've studied clinical psychology and now trying to bring this importantly to first responders kind of all over North America, and privileged to do that, really privileged to do that, and to share circles with those first responders, sometimes as part of research. And I do a lot of volunteer work sort of with nonprofits and First Nations communities, so that, money isn't a hindrance to these skills. Because I believe that sometimes we are so dysregulated as first responders, and we are so suffering because of what we're exposed to. And we're out there trying to help all of these traumatized people that are suffering. And it's just not going to work. Compassion is going to work. And those are skills that we can actually train. Science actually says that for the naysayers out there. And high performance sports athletes, same thing. Science supports compassion for elite performance. And I think that's going to help our well-being. And more importantly, it's going to help the people that we serve. And this is evidence-based, but it's just a little bit outside the box for a very hyper masculine culture that is a little bit behind the times.
Actually, also, I wanted to say I didn't know Renae to be the asshole. So I would say that you're not an asshole, and you never were. I didn't have that experience. I experienced someone who was passionate, that was really caring, and worked very hard. And I think everybody else would kind of say that too. So that wasn't my experience. So coming into policing, the culture is interesting, to say the least. So as a woman coming in 1996, after a few years and after having a kid, I thought, I know how this rolls. I know. And I was like, maybe I'll kind of, and when I say how this rolls, like there was only males in leadership. There was usually a wife at home tending to the kids. And that when you like, it even felt weird you felt like you were a young person telling your dad you're pregnant when you're actually a woman in a profession. And you're like, hey, my family's chosen to have children. And that it was quite a thing. Like, why did you become a police officer? All this thing. So I'm like, okay, I know how this rolls. I do want to be a police officer. I do want to be a mom. So I kind of wrote my own rules. And it kind of worked really well for me. So my roles were, I came into policing for the reasons that I came. I come with my background. I am into kind of like the restorative justice and marginalized communities in their interactions with police, and how can I kind of really enjoy my career kind of sort of on my own terms, like doing the things that police officers do with kind of guided by the values that help me to have resiliency within it and enjoy it. I worked in kind of a lot of community policing because I found that there was a lot of latitude to really dig in and do detective work, like bring awareness, especially to like the missing and murdered women and sexually exploited youth. Like there's lots of marginalized communities that they were like, I spent probably about 18, 19 years and that they were my people. So just kind of digging into marginalized people and helping support them and bringing police services to them. So that was kind of where my heart was. So kind of really enjoying that, connecting with the community, like really loving that, creating programs. One of my programs got an award, go on maternity leave, and then they get rid of your program, come back again, recreate it. So let your new chief know that it exists. And then, so just kind of doing things, knowing that the culture is the way that it is, and kind of walking to the beat of your own drum, and enjoying the people along the way and having a good career that way. So, and then also as time went on, like I did my master's degree because I was also thinking a few years in, I'm like, I'm not sure that I can last very long because this doesn't really feel very fair, gender wise, or even like diversity wise. Like in Abbotsford, 50% of the population is South Asian, and that didn't really reflect in leadership or anyways, just kind of an observation. I'm like, yeah, I'll probably step out. I'll do my master's degree and then I'll excuse myself graciously. And then what I found is that I learned so much. I'm like, oh my gosh, it made me want to dig in more. I'm like, okay, the fact that I call it my parachute, the fact that I had options helped me to stay 19 years. I'm just like, yeah, I could do this, but I'm choosing to be here because it makes sense to me. So I really kind of enjoyed my career. So this is some of the advocacy I do too. So lots of first responders. So they did some research on Vancouver police, And they found that 50% of officers qualified for a mental health diagnosis. So if you think about that and the wear and the tear, so in my own experiences, there's lots of young officers. So when I say young, like with MS, lupus, like brain tumors. So just kind of lots of wear and tear on the nervous system. So it sometimes expresses in physical stuff or also in mental health. That if you're exposed to, they say the average person, if I'm correct, like might experience 3 critical incidents in their life, whereas a police officer over 19 years, or 20 years, actually 20, would have 800. So if you think about what one must go through in order to kind of show up and do the job, and then kind of with my background, it sort of made sense. In the culture, they weren't kind of trained on like trauma or even marginalization. Like there's lots of pieces that were kind of missing there. So kind of understanding those pieces, that helped me to kind of be resilient because I'm like, okay, that's why, or maybe that's why people are reacting that way. And maybe I won't take it so hard about the culture. I'll just I'll do me. But then also I won't speak up too much because I still want to belong. So that's kind of my injury. When I think about PTSD, it would be, or like having an operational stress injury, it wasn't so much. And this is what the research shows too. It's not the operational, it's the organizational. So that would have been the traumatizing. Like it's not fair. There's not like the diversity that I think should be there. Not all the voices are heard. We're not responding to the community in kind of a fair way where we've got legislation. And everybody is doing the best they can with what they've got, and they come with a good heart and they want to do good work. They just don't have maybe all the tools or all the pieces. So when I think about, mental health, after our 2 colleagues ended their life through suicide, like our department was in shambles. There was a lot going on. So this is the wear and the tear part for myself. I was exhausted and burnt out, and burnt out has it looks like PTSD too. So the symptoms are kind of similar. What I didn't know until I moved to Victoria is actually I had a parathyroid tumor, which also makes you feel exhausted and smullens your window of tolerance. So I'm thinking that's not something someone my age got. People usually in their 80s get that. So when you have the wear and the tear and young people getting diseases that old people get, and that's like an endocrine thing, that's like a nervous system thing. So kind of having kind of a shorter bandwidth, I'm like, this is my parachute. I'm stepping off right now. I need to take space from this place. So it's really hard to do when you have a mental health background and you see people are struggling, but also knowing that your skill set wasn't really valued when you said, hey, and you've mentioned mental health is a problem. And then people are like, oh, really? I didn't know that. So now I retired and then I moved over to the island. That was like 6 years ago. So now I do mental health. I work with a lot of first responders of all the types. And then I do advocacy too. So kind of at the parliamentary, did 2 talks with the Parliamentary Review Committee on the Police Act, where I spoke about mental health and police reform. I joined the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform too, which are like a bunch of lots of retired chiefs or just community members that want kind of having maybe like a college of policing where they have standardized research informed kind of methods. So I'm kind of, so advocating for police reform.
I was just actually going to reference about the window of tolerance because I'm not sure everybody kind of would know what we mean by that, right? It's just sort of like you're sort of prime operating. So when I jokingly said, I'm a recovering asshole, really what I meant was, my window of tolerance was about this big because for the most of the time I was hypervigilant and sort of outside of my window of tolerance, or was my perception, right? And so the problem is when you have 800 critical incidents in a 20-year career, these are people that are working 48-hour weeks on average if they're 4 on, 4 off, right? And so you're adrenally fatigued. You're wearing all of this kit that is physiologically damaging for your back. There's just all of these compounding things. And that window of tolerance for that prime sort of operating is just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And then you have the added organizational pressure, right? Where if you look at the research out of Regina, which is Canadian specific, right? On first responders, some of the phenomenological research, the qualitative research, is quoting things like first responders are feeling disposable. They feel discarded. Les, I think you have a great story. I don't know if you'll remember it. That just made me think of that, right? About the uniform. You know the one I'm talking about?
Renae, I'm not sure which one. just about how it is such a, the culture is so power centric. On your uniform, you wear little things that say, I'm more important than you. Look, I got these two things here, or these stripes here. And so, and there's saluting, and it's paramilitary, and they call you sir or ma'am or what, so it's very much these visible, manifestations of power in the culture. I'm like the military or I suppose paramedics the same, fire department the same. What fascinates me is people's relationship to the power that they have. You probably not wanted me to tell this story, Renae, but I'm thinking about one of the things that police officers do, obviously, is that they have to keep people safe, and they have the obligation to use force at times. They're required to use force. There's an expectation. But just like if I were to, again, back to the length of, not resiliency, but your gas tank, if you met me at the beginning of a shift at 7:00 and we were having it like in the evening, and we were having it, you needed my help or you were having an issue, you would get less one way. If you met me at 4:30 after I've been to 20 of those bar fights or 10 of those, there would be a different less showing up. And just so that ability to shake every call off, to start fresh, to take a breath, to treat the person that you're with every time like it's 7:00 less. It's the beginning of your shift. It's not so, and they had nothing to do with the last 20 people that you had to deal with. So just like in policing, you have the lawful authority to turn someone into a pretzel and put them in the back of your police car. If they need to be arrested and they're not complying, you use the usual stuff. So you're allowed to do that. You have the authority to do that, and there's expectations that you do that. And you can talk them into your back of your police car, and that takes longer. It's slower. It requires, especially someone who's, if they're drunk or under the influence of something, they're not processing your logic, but you can get them. And at the end of the day, when you talk them into the back of your police car, they don't get hurt and you don't get hurt. Morally, physically, psychologically, spiritually. I think that also applies inside police agencies with leadership and power. You have the authority because of the stuff on your shoulder or your arm to say, tell you what, you're going to do it because I'm the chief and you're the constable. That's why we're doing it. And when you get 30 years, you can come and talk to me about how you think it should be done. This kind of culture. Or you could not use your power and you could reveal your logic as a leader. You could say, well, here's what I'm valuing the most in this decision, or here's why we're doing this. What do you think? Like, share with me, because there's a good chance I'll learn something from you. So that it's the same sort of thing. You don't need to use your power in a paramilitary organization. If you rely on it too much, it can hurt you and hurt the other person. These moral injuries that we talk about, for example. So take your time, just like having someone walk into the back of your police car or step into the back of a police car instead of you forcing them in. So there's a parallel there. Again, Renae, I'm not sure if that's what you're thinking, but that's what I think.
This is what comes up for me too when you were saying about power too. This is what the social work education helped me to kind of understand. Like, even there's power differentials when you're a police officer or you're a white police officer, or you're like, there's so many variables of privilege that if we don't even know that there's such a thing as privilege, we take it for granted. And when we're in a position of authority and we're trying to help people out, then we need to be aware. We have to be aware of those things, or else we're going to be oppressing them. And even if you think about like operational, like organizational stress too, like be aware of who are our people in authority. Is there something common about all of them? Usually they're all white men, or not that there's, not to start that up, but just being curious about having the reflection of the people that we serve also be in leadership positions, and also having the diversity and recognizing that as the gift, like having a gift that we have many different reflections here, so we can get a bigger picture than just kind of paramilitary. Your dad was a police officer, his dad, and it's just an intergenerational kind of, and also often they'll have a certain leaning politically too, which doesn't necessarily represent, if that makes sense. This was in my era, so this was a thing that kind of stood out for me. That was the cognitive dissonance, where I'm like, this does not sit well with me. So back in the era, I don't know if it was in the 90s or early 2000s, the union's like, we support conservative. At that time, he was trying to sign a petition to get rid of same-sex marriage. And I thought maybe they align with, they want conservative crackdown on crime. And I'm like, what about the LGBTQ community in our department that maybe we're not aware of? Like, that didn't sit well with me. And I'm like, I don't remember voting. And then I stopped going to union meetings. I'm like, this does not speak for my voice. And then it kind of made me think, I need to kind of disengage from, we need diversity in all sorts of political spheres, representations, ideas, so that we actually serve the community in the way that they deserve to be served.
The common thread, especially with you and Les and I, is around mindfulness, right? And like, you said at the beginning of this podcast, right? Bringing that beginner's mind. And that's really the message, or sort of the passion that all three of us share, is to bring that beginner's mind and that non-judgment to every sort of contact with somebody that we're serving the community, or even contact with a colleague or contact with a leader, right? Like, what else might be true? What's going on in here? How am I perceiving this, right? One of the most humbling experiences that I ever had was as an undercover operator in the low track of Vancouver, and as a hooker, experiencing how the public treats me. So not even the customers, but just people that would drive by disgusted by this hooker on the corner, and the words or things that they would throw at you, and just the absolute disgust that they would hurl at you. And I'm an undercover police officer. I know that, but I was like, whoa, right? Or even the contact with, throughout our career, there was times, Jill worked a lot with our marginalized. I had, the ability sometimes to work in witness protection. And so, doing these long shifts where you're sort of the security and the protection for a witness who may be a sex trade worker, and really just understanding their story and how they got to where they got. Like, it was just incredible. And meeting them as a human versus the culture when we come into it, and even the terminology that we have for criminals, in my academic and sort of through this trauma competent lens, understanding that at the core of most of this is suffering and trauma. That's what's leading to addiction, which is what's, feeding the crime. With men, it's typically B&Es and armed robberies and that sort of thing, and in our women, our sex trade workers, that's how they're feeding their habit.
Oh, I just want to take a breath here, because, you are in this work and this is the world that you live in, but I'm just thinking about, myself and the listener, like what you have just shared and illuminated for us is, it's heavy, because to think about the amount of trauma that first responders are working with on a day-to-day basis, and then, and then we're like, and show up with compassion and patience and whatever, in a culture and a system that is traumatized, that it comes from a traumatized place. And then you're trying to serve traumatized people. Like, I just want to pause to just acknowledge what you're working with on a day-to-day basis. And when you say the window of tolerance, like, in the general public that I work with a lot, and I work with teachers and other folks too, like, the general window of tolerance is so small right now, and you could just feel that tension, that just like everybody's on the brink of their edge. And that's the regular population that has maybe 3 traumatic events in their lifetime versus 800 it's mind-boggling, actually, what you've all just shared. And so I just want to lock that in to people's minds and hearts right now, and let people kind of be with that.
When I think back to, again, we all have different experiences and different career paths and things we did. And I can count on one hand, probably in 32 years, I was in the right place at the right time to make a difference, big difference. This is what I try as a retired person now. I think about those, because that is, it was like, seriously, maybe 5 in 30 years. But if I think about that versus the 800, it's not as good for me. So yes, and you get a chance to just, boy, oh boy, just be there for whatever it is, and just if you weren't there, what would have happened? You know, and the way you reacted, what you did for someone in the darkest experience a person could have, 25 years later, you still get Christmas cards from them. So I just felt the need to share that part too, is that there is all of that, and all of us are committed to doing something about helping with that. You know, there is light. It's not all dark. There is light.
Yeah, I so appreciate, Les, you bringing us back into that. So thank you for bringing the light into the dark. It's important that all of it be considered and put into context. So thank you. I don't want to end this conversation without giving each of you an opportunity to just talk directly to police reform, because we're in that topic right now very much. It's in the media for sure. I know that you're all thinking about it. The question really is, what do you want to contribute to that conversation that's happening right now? I know this conversation got elevated after George Floyd's death, and it certainly began with a dialogue around systemic racism in these systems. It's been ongoing. That was 2 years ago that conversation started. So yeah, what is it that you want to add to this dialogue on police reform, or what do you want people to know?
I think people would be surprised. Like I'm a proponent of body cameras because it is the best evidence. If you got kind of the more of like the whole picture of what exactly happened at an incident, I think people would be surprised. I think they would be proud of the work that police officers do, and they would get the complexity of it, and they would see what happened. And then also police officers, like it's kind of easier for them to kind of walk people through their process too, if they have kind of a visual aid. So yeah, when people are in their most vulnerable moments and they call police to help people feel safe in a circumstance, and the police show up and we have our training and our skill set and our humanity, I think people would feel proud of that. But also, having said that too, kind of taking like the totality of it all in, that we do have a bandwidth as first responders, and how do we nurture and care for our nervous system so that we can show up as 7 p.m. less, as our kind of our best selves, and how do we take care of people? So kind of thinking about police reform, like that's kind of why I joined the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform, and I also spoke twice at the Parliamentary Review Committee, because I feel passionate. Police officers do good work. And also they need a few more feathers in their cap. They need maybe some more knowledge there that I feel blessed that I had coming in with my social work of kind of systemic stuff. And the thing that I like about the Coalition for Canadian Police Reform is they're advocating for a college of policing where there's some accountability and some look from the community of how to have things across the board kind of standardized so that everybody's sort of on the same page, and that it's research proven so that we can offer the best service. Because people first responders deserve a proper knowledge set and care. And so that we can best serve our community.
I think, it's sort of in line sort of with the recommendations of the Provincial Reform Committee too, is this college. But also we need to focus on training that's evidence-based. Policing is historical sort of knee-jerk, let's do this, and there's no efficacy to it. So let's use evidence-based training and focus on wellness, because if we focused on that and stuff like compassion skills and sort of mindfulness based, we're not going to have to go to the force option. It's still there. We still need to train it, but maybe we can actually take a little bit of time. I mean, we spend so much time training on the bad guy killing us, but the reality is we kill ourselves by suicide and by our health issues at significantly higher rates than any bad guy kills us. And that dysregulation is creating so many of the volatile systems. Systemic racism, absolutely real. But if you understood implicit bias, and if you understood sort of how judgment rises up and recognize it, maybe you can actually take that pause. Case in point, like if you work in a career where your contact with certain sort of ethnic groups is one theme. I just look at when I came into policing.
Like marginalized populations.
Well, no marginalized, but I was actually thinking more sort of when marijuana was illegal and a lot of Asian gangs when I started. I would look at somebody that was, say, Vietnamese or Asian, because all of my contacts with them were because I was working with the drug squad, right? But then recognizing, oh, wait a second, what else might be true, right? Having the skills to recognize that judgment, because all of us have judgment. So some foundational skills need to be taught at the recruit level, but it needs to be part of our annual certifications. We spend so much on guns and use of force and so little on things like that, decision making. And if we focused on that, we wouldn't have a lot of these problems that we have, like the work that Les is doing around power. There's just some really foundational skills that are evidence-based training that we should be using. But there's a disconnect between those in control of the purse strings and the departments and those sort of maybe with the knowledge. There's a real disconnect. I mean, we're all nerds. So we literally read research journals for fun and we send them to each other.
And it's also a huge responsibility when you're carrying a weapon to end someone's life that maybe it seems pretty reasonable to expect you to have this other skill set. It's kind of a big responsibility.
I agree with everything that's been said. Two things, because I started 88, and I always remember going to my first detachment there and convincing the sergeant who ran the place, can you give us an old file room? Because we're going to bring a bunch of our own homemade weights. And we're going to somebody made a bench and, those Simpsons, Sears, the brown weights, and somebody else bought one of those grippy things. And we built this gym in this detachment. And there's a few, of us that were, kind of out of the academy or younger. We were religiously in there working out constantly. And some of the older generation police officers were like, I get it, but you're only given so many breaths. Why do you want to waste them on exercise? Fast forward to now, everybody gets it. Everybody understands that you have to take care of your body for the shift work, for the everything that we've just been talking about. And you won't find a police department or detachment anywhere that doesn't have something for your body. I feel like we're in the 80s of the mind now. Everybody's bringing their Sears weights, their little, this practice, this contemplative practice, this, and everybody's trying to say, we need this. We've got the physical training figured out. Now we need to get the mental training figured out, that this is a cornerstone of any career. And we're talking about the criminal justice and policing in particular. But so I'm optimistic that we will be in a place in 10, 15 years where they'll be saying, remember that podcast on Circle of Change? Why were they even talking about that? Everybody understands this. And then I think for me, the next one though is the spiritual part of the job, and that's so mind, body, and spirit, and that's again, that takes it to a different level, and not so much the religious part, but just as Jill was talking about there, this is a job with some significant responsibilities, one that you put on your hip every day before you go out on the street. And how do you make sense of that? So there's existential conversations at Timmy's at 4 a.m. with police officers that I think philosophers would be very impressed with, because you are in this position, as Jill was talking about, that's the high end, I know, but of having to decide who is going to live and who's going to not live in this situation because you're going to stop something from happening. How do you make sense of that? And how do you give sense around that too? So that's another thing, and maybe later or never, I don't know, but I think that's next. And then, first of all, we're in an evolution, not a revolution. Policing has evolved for hundreds of years. It's constantly evolving. We need to evolve again. We don't need to have a revolution, but we need to continue to evolve and be better at serving the community we're responsible for. So I am optimistic. We have an opportunity to do some amazing new things in this profession, and to be on the edge of some of these ideas, leading, because I know I'm acknowledging my bias here a little bit, but healthcare, education, these other institutions are not far behind us in dramatically being questioned about how they exist, why they exist. But because policing, we have that in-your-face power, we are getting this first, as we should, as I believe, as we should, because we do have that ability to make these, to really influence people's day. So I'm optimistic, and I hope policing can be the North Star of okay, look, this is how, through be it mental practices, spirit, whatever it is, a more holistic approach to the person who's doing the job. And maybe it is saying, okay, all this work that we're sending them to do because nobody else is around, maybe we need to take some money and put it into that. I mean, it's simplistic. I know it's not that simple, but there are a lot of things that a police officer does. I love the challenge of every situation, but a lot of times it would be like, I didn't know I'd be doing this when I signed up for this job. But sure, let's go, drive around the Inner Harbor and check for toilets on boats. I guess that's what the boss wants. That's what we're going to do, So anyway, I think there's opportunity here. I think the quickest way to make things happen is to go slow.
Oh, I love, all those words. And what you just touched on, Les, it's like you are leaders in this period of intense change. And that's never easy, to be the instigator, to be the one on the leading edge. You really have to have a lot of courage and determination. And you do, all of you. And you also have a lot of heart and love in the game. And you're coming at it from a centered place. You're in your own work. And I think that is a quality so essential in leading this evolution, which I think all of you are in that space. So that makes me happy. That that gives me hope as well. So I'm just so grateful to know all of you. I want to ask one more question. I know we've been here much longer than anticipated, and then we'll close up. But you are all change makers in my mind and my heart. And this podcast is really about supporting people out there who want to be the change. And that means so many different things to different people. So I'm curious to know just your perspective on what does it mean to you to be the change?
For me, being the change is just being myself. So being myself is I've got kind of some knowledge and some experience in policing and a heart for the people that I worked with and those that I served. And then also being out of the culture, I get to be Jill. And being Jill, and then first responders come to me and I understand kind of what they're up against and kind of holding space for that, so that they have a safe place to kind of maybe work through some of the stuff or the stuff that they're coming into contact with. And it's a super privilege because it's a hard job. So, and I get to be me and I care. And that's like my favorite thing. I love my job. I told my partner, I'm like, I could do this for forever because it's so lovely when people come in to see a counselor. The level of vulnerability, like I'm a human and I'm doing the best that I can with what I've got. And you get to hold space for them and you get to recognize what they bring to the table as a gift and that they don't have to do it alone. So for me, I don't know, I feel very blessed. I just get to be me and get to care about people and know that they're not alone. And then that we're all figuring out this together and that we're here for a period of time, however long that is.
But it's the same thing. I mean, I think being my authentic self, which sometimes is, a blubberer, right? An emotional person, but a very heart sort of, front and center person. And I also am privileged to work in similar spaces, right? Where I get to teach meditation to first responders, where, I get to work with first responders in a clinical coaching and counseling capacity. And I show up as authentic me, vulnerable, work in progress, right? Some days are great. Some days are really hard. And in our culture, our police culture and our first responder culture, that is a departure, right? Because we put on this uniform and we put on this perfection and we just suck it all up. So to show them it's okay. It's okay as you are, right? All of your parts are okay. And we'll get into another counseling, integrated family systems talk, but all of your parts are okay. And to love all of those parts. My sort of neat, I guess, is around research. Like I love being involved in research because I know that's how some of the change is going to happen, is sort of through those kind of formal institutions. And then once people kind of get it because it came through academia, they're like, oh, like I get this, right? It's sort of the gateway to get into a lot of these institutions that we really, really need it. So I'll just keep being my quirky, vulnerable weirdo self?
As far as me to be the change, I just think I try to be gentle but relentless about bringing the light, instead of the darkness, and even to just find ways to, as both of my awesome people here said, just introduce that idea. There might be another way. There could be another way here. Just even to just get that much room, to opening up that maybe there's other ways we can do things. But again, maybe a product of age or whatever, but just, that gentle but relentless pursuit of the light.
Wow. I feel so honored to have had this time with all of you in Circle. It was truly a unique experience and stories that I've never had the privilege of hearing before. It so impacted me. This is a conversation I know I'm going to really enjoy listening to again and again, because there's so much in here to unpack and hear. But I want to leave by expressing my deep gratitude to who you are, to the work that you're doing, and to how it is you choose to show up in the world and be the change. And I think you're serving a population group that is kind of a population group on the fringe. Really, it is like an underserved community that I don't think we often think of as that. That to me just feels really important. And everything that you've shared here today are lessons and insights for humanity. And I think it's just magnified in our first responder population. So thank you so much. I know this conversation is going to make a difference. So yes, bless all of you.
I could go for another hour.
Yeah. Relentless, right?
Yeah.
Me too.
But I know better.
Funny.
Wow. Wasn't that amazing? I'm so curious what you learned and are picking up on in this conversation. Here are some sentences that are sticking out for me that I'm simply going to read and let sink in. We can train compassion. We are in an evolution, not a revolution. What else might be true? As changemakers, we are gentle and relentless about bringing light to the darkness. These are phrases that are going to sit with me and continue to stir and evolve and become part of my being. If you know somebody who is working in police reform or is a first responder and you feel that they might be seen in this conversation, I would love for you to send them this episode. And if you like this kind of open, honest conversation, if you think this show is making a difference, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review and let others know, or leave us a review on social media or via email. And of course, we welcome and depend upon your financial contribution to support this show. To become a Circle of Change supporter, please go to humconsulting.ca/donate. I'll see you next week for an intimate conversation avec moi. Ciao. I'm now passing the talking piece to you. If you feel called to put your voice in the circle, please head to humconsulting.ca/podcast and share your story there. I cannot wait to hear what has come up for you as you have listened to what has been shared here today. I wish you love and joy beyond your wildest imagination. Thank you so much for being here in the Circle of Change. I also want to express my gratitude to the following peeps. Circle of Change is recorded on Lekwungen territories, and I am so grateful to live on this land. Our opening and closing music was created by the talented E-Roll Beats. You can find his creations at erollbeats.com. And special thanks to my coach, Mary Chan of Organized Sound Productions, for bringing this podcast to life. Until next time, ciao.